There are a number of Catholics who believe that Pope Benedict XVI's resignation in 2013 wasn't valid, and that he remained Pope until his death in December last year. These Catholics do not recognize Francis as valid, and upon the death of Benedict, they gave the College of Cardinals 21 days to elect a successor. 21 days have elapsed, and today I spoke to Brother Alexis Bugnolo about the Assembly of the Faithful that is happening tomorrow in Rome to elect a new bishop. The views and opinions in the following video are not necessarily those of Caritas and Veritate. Today I'm joined by Brother Alexis Bugnolo. He's a Franciscan hermit based in Rome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. And would you mind starting off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be in Rome and your ministry there?
Okay, so I'm an Italian-American, born in New Jersey. I'm a graduate of the University of Florida, Gainesville, with a bachelor's in cultural anthropology, class of 1986. I became a Franciscan friar with the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate in 91, and I was with them until 96, when I started living like a hermit. I left my former community because it was totally out of control. It wasn't following internally the rules and regulations of the church. And I said, I only have one life to live. I'm not going to join a group of crooks. I'm half Sicilian and half Piedmont, half Venetian, Piedmontese. And my Sicilian side of the family has never had anything to do with the mafia. We hate corruption. So I'm very anti-corruption. And well, for the first part of my, while I lived like private vows from 96 onward, I dedicated myself to translating Bonaventure and St. Francis, their writings into English. So it was like I didn't pay attention to anything doing in the world. And I lived some of that time in Italy. I came to study in Rome in 2011. I was in Rome in 2013 when Benedict read his famous declaration. And I knew there was something strange with that. And I couldn't figure out why no one thought it was strange. And then my mother got ill. I went back to the States to take care of her. She died of dementia, and it's very, very, very saddening kind of disease. And it was just about the month she passed away, that this controversy about Benedict still being the Pope broke in the English social media speaking world, because there was this Monsignor Niccolo Bu, a very influential, highly regarded theologian at the Vatican, who made a quip at some conference that really just started a fire. And his quip was, it's a lot easier to demonstrate that Benedict didn't resign validly than to prove that Bergoglio is a heretic. Well, when he said that, this combox discussions all over the internet started going on. And I started collecting all the arguments for and against, because I had just finished translating like 6,000 pages of Latin Bonaventure's scholastic arguments, where he lines up all the arguments like Thomas does in the Summa, and then he gives his answer. And my chief opponent was Steve Skojec at 1 Peter 5. Right. And I put arguments together, and I concluded that Benedict is still the Pope, and this is why all the arguments for are valid and all the arguments against aren't valid. And it was Skojec, or one of his followers, who invented the term bene vacantis, which is the puerile way of just insulting your opponent by coming up with a word that doesn't really mean this, because I never believed the apostolic see was vacant. Right. In a way, that's what bene vacantis means. They were trying to say we held that Benedict was the Pope, and the seat was not vacant, but not. So the year following, I was invited to come to Rome and organize a conference which would demonstrate that Benedict was still the Pope on canon law. And I and Father Walter Covens gave the 3 papers, and everyone who attended agreed that Benedict was the Pope. And after that, I decided just to stay in Rome, attempt to lobby the cardinals. And I met with Father Guirlanda, who is now Cardinal Guirlanda, a Bergoglian cardinal, of the Pontifical Gregorian University, their chief expert on canon law. And he just went wild. He didn't know why I was going to talk to him. And then I started saying, well, because Benedict's still the Pope and it can canonically be demonstrated, he went wild. And I was very encouraged with that meeting because I defeated all his arguments. And this is a man who has like a doctorate in canon law and has published numerous papers.
Right.
Then I went and spoke with Monsignor Arieta, who is the secretary of the Pontifical Council of Legislative Texts. And he is one of the most eminent canonists in the entire church. And I sat down with him with 45 minutes, and I also defeated all his arguments. So then I realized that they have no argument. Even the top canonists in Rome have no argument to say that Bergoglio is the Pope.
Could you walk us through why your understanding of why Benedict was still the valid Pope?
Okay,
What actually happened when he resigned?
Okay, so in the Catholic Church, the Church, we are not a man-made institution. The founder of our holy religion is God himself, who is truth, and he is the cause of all truth. And that's why our church is a canonical church, that is, a church that follows rules. There are lots of forms of Christianity that don't follow any rules. One leader can succeed another, there's no rules about it. But in the Catholic Church, there is rules, and we follow them strictly. And that's what distinguishes the true church from all kinds of fake schismatic or corrupt versions. And throughout the centuries, bishops have met together in councils to put the church back in canonical order, to get clergy to start obeying the rules and living the life they should, and things of that sort. So this has to do with the fact that the living God, when he was incarnate and took the name Jesus Christ, made a very important promise to Peter and all his successors. He says, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And this is Christ's way of declaring in the most emphatic manner that I'm going to have the back of Peter and the popes whenever they lay down a rule. And this is it could be any kind of rule, but it's especially canon law, and especially any law Pope might make about who would be a successor, how he would be elected. So as Catholics, we believe that canon law is written in heaven, not in the sense that it's eternal or unchanging, but that because God backs it. God is going to ask us whether we have followed canon law. Now, most of us don't know anything about canon law, and we don't really need to. It's the domain of the clergy. It tells them how to do this and that and stuff. Wow. It's worthwhile that Catholics getting themselves a copy of canon law and read it. So when the Pope lays down a rule about who can elect his successor, Christ is going to follow that rule. And Christ will not give the grace of the office of St. Peter to a man who's not validly or canonically or legally or juridically elected. Okay.
Right.
Had in the Catholic Church like more than 26 fake claimants to the papacy. They're called anti-popes. And an anti-pope is someone who might dress like the Pope, preach like the Pope, govern the entire Church of Rome or in the whole world like the Pope, but he's not the Pope because he didn't get into power by following those rules. Some rule was broken. And sometimes it was because he got less votes than he needed to get, or other times because he was elected after the real one. Most of the anti-popes came into being because the College of Cardinals, which is an institution only existing in the last 1,000 years, more or less. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The Cardinals have been they're the ones that caused the Great Schism in 1378 to 1415, because they get in fights with one another and they can't agree, and they both factions elect a pope. Right. That there were very few anti-popes, but it was mostly because either the German emperor didn't like the Pope and he wanted to put his man on the throne of Peter, so he created a fake Pope, or the Byzantine emperor wanted the same thing. So this is important for us because if we want to be in communion with Jesus Christ, we need to know who the true Pope is, and we have the right to know who the true Pope is.
Absolutely.
And the Pope to the church is like the neck. So the church is called Christ's mystical body, and Christ is called the head of the church. Well, what connects the head with the body? It's the neck. And using a metaphor, you could say the Pope is the neck. Because if you're not in communion with the true Pope, you're not in communion with the true head or the true body. Okay? You're not in the right body, you're in some other body that's hooked up to some other head. And this is very important because if we're not in communion with Christ, the Holy Spirit's going to withdraw from us, and we're going to start losing the grace of God. And we see this from all Christian churches that broke away from the apostolic see throughout the centuries, whether they call themselves Orthodox or Protestant. They started deviating from all the doctrines of the faith. The Orthodox started allowing triple marriages. Next, didn't need to get into annulment. They got into triple marriages because the emperor that wanted to do it, and well, they just followed with. They thought it was more important to follow the emperor than follow the teaching of Christ. The Protestants got rid of the sacraments, or at least some or all of the sacraments. So, most of them keep at least baptism. Some of them don't even believe in that anymore. So it's a very, very important thing that we remain in communion with the Pope, the true Pope. And in fact, Pope Boniface VIII, around the year 1303 or 02, in a bull called Unum Sanctum, one of the most famous papal documents, said, if you are not subject and in communion with the Roman Pontiff, you cannot be saved. And that's just a succinct summary of Catholic teaching. The Pope is the measure of unity. He's the touchstone. If you're communion with the Pope, you're in communion with the whole church. You're Catholic if you're in communion with the Pope. So it's obviously a very grave matter when the cardinals start playing games about who is the true Pope and not the Pope. And they start electing someone not according to the rules or ignoring the person who is. And alas, this does happen. And in modern times, we have this case of what happened in 2013. Now, the globalists had to get rid of Benedict, because Benedict was against the dictatorship of relativism. He was against the dictatorship of the mass media, and he was against the dictatorship of high finance, and actually used these terms and denounced them. He was also against the production and use of vaccines that involved the use of fetal tissue in their development and production. He was also a man of great faith. Even in the most horrible of pandemics, he would have told Catholics to go to church on Sunday and trust in God. And if you had the entire Catholic world of 1 billion go to Mass on Sunday as soon as they declared a pandemic, that would have been the end of the campaign of terror. People would say, they're going to Mass and they're not dropping dead. There's no pandemic.
Right.
They needed someone in there who would be lockstep, in sync with the whole globalist Great Reset agenda. And how would they going to do that? But getting rid of Benedict. And so as soon as he was elected, the NSA started working on forcing him to resign. And it was recently revealed just a few weeks ago by a member of the Italian military, who I know, that that's in fact what they work to do. The media around the world attack Benedict every day, insulting him, accusing him of things he never did. They funded groups of priests in Austria and Germany to demand all kinds of outrageous things, and threatening to go in schism unless he resigned. And they even hatched death threats on him. The people in the Curia were paid not to obey him. In his very first year of office, he told Bishop Fillet, my authority ends at the threshold of my office door. He accepted the papacy thinking they'd obey him. They had never intention of obeying him. But despite all that, and despite all his health problems, he strove to do as much as he could do. And he was the first pope to defrock more than 500 priests for sexual crimes. And he is unique in the history of the papacy for that.
Right.
He wasn't a clerical old boys clubber member. He felt that Christ founded the church, and therefore to save the little ones, and therefore We need ministers who are worthy of that trust. And if they're not, get them out of there, because the clergy are to serve the people, not the people the clergy. So unfortunately with Benedict, he was like an idealist. Once he started demanding both the liberals and conservatives get rid of their pedophiles, he had lost all his structural basis of power in the Vatican. And then they all wanted him out. And they had engineered the theft of his letters, private letters from his office, and the publishing of them. Really embarrassing. One of his favorite secretaries was run over on the road. And he ordered an investigation into the corruption in the Vatican, the sexual corruption in the Vatican. And when that report arrived on his desk on the 16th of December, 2012, and he saw how bad it was, he decided he would resign. In the English-speaking world, we're not too expertise on these three different words. The words, one is resign, and abdicate, and renounce. Now, maybe in the British Isles, you're more familiar with abdicate because, well, there's a monarchy still in England.
Right.
And people know what abdication is. But in the United States, no one's heard of abdicate for, generations because we don't have a king. And these three things are different. When you abdicate, you give up all claim to power, all title, and all office. You also give up all dignity and all perks. Okay. Once you abdicate, you've lost it all. When you renounce, you can renounce one or two things, and I'll get to that. But when you resign, technically speaking, when you resign, you just give up the doing of the thing. So if a full professor at Oxford resigns, he becomes a professor emeritus. He still has the dignity. He still gets some of the perks. And he might even still, and then he might have a position of governing in the university still. He's just not teaching every day and doesn't have to. So resignation has to do with ministry, giving up ministry. And abdication is giving it all. Well, the Code of Canon Law in 1983, when John Paul II renewed it, there was a change introduced, and it's believed it was under the influence of Cardinal Ratzinger and other canonists. Instead of the Pope only having to say, I renounce, and so that he would abdicate, now he would have to say, I renounce my munus. Okay, so right. Munus is a Latin word that in English we don't have a word anymore. It existed in the Middle Ages when you said, I charge you to clear the bandits out of that forest. And if the king said, I charge you to clear the bandits out of that forest, the person he's speaking to becomes the sheriff, because he's received charge. Now he has the office of sheriff, and he has authority and duty to do that. So it's called a charge, and not like a charge on your credit card, but a charge in the sense of you're charged to do something. And when Christ tells Peter, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, he's giving him a charge, do something. So in the new Code of Canon Law, they use that Latin word munus, which also means gift, and a gift of grace, because it's a gift of grace as well as a charge. Because Christ, when he gives a bishop or a priest or the Pope a charge to care for his flock, he's also going to give him grace. He's also going to guarantee him grace to do that. So in the new code, a Pope has to say, I renounce my charge, I renounce my munus. He can renounce any other thing, and he can pretend to renounce and not really renounce. So Benedict, as revealed in his recent book that was just published posthumously, he said most bishops are functionally not Catholic. And he had, by the time February 11th, 2013 came around, he realized that almost no one in the Curia was Catholic anymore, and that none of the cardinals even believed the faith anymore. And they were going to destroy the church. And he says this in his declaration in Latin, by a very slight little error. It appears to be an error in the Latin, but it's not. It appears he's saying, I've called you this consistory for the canonization of three saints to communicate to you news of great importance for the life of the church. That's what it appears he's writing. But he doesn't write vobiscum, he writes vobis. And so the whole sentence changes meaning. It says, I've called you to this consistory for the canonization of three saints because I wanted to announce something of great importance to the life of the church. You're being cut off.
That's what it translated to.
That's what it really says, because he wrote vobis decisionum instead of vobis decisionum. And he was such a brilliant man. And then he goes on and he says, I declare that I renounce the ministry I received through the hands of the cardinals the day I was elected.
Right.
Not the papacy, because in canon law by John Paul II, there's only one word, one noun used for the papal office, and it's not officium in the Latin, it's munus. Canon 331, 2, 3, 4, 5, those 5 canons, and then canon 749, I think, or 7. So only the word munus is used, no other word. The ministry is not used. Matter of fact, if you look at the entire code of canon law, renouncing ministry doesn't mean anything. Now, this is different from English, because in English, when priests give up the ministry, they'll write a letter saying, I'm renouncing the ministry. Because in English, our word ministry is understood as an office, kind of like the Greek diaconia. But in canon law has a strict rules about how words are used and how they're supposed to be used, canon 17. So you just can't change what they mean. They wanted all his gold, and he put fool's gold on the table, and they thought he was just an ignoramus and that they had it. So they grabbed it and ran off, but they didn't get the real gold. They got the fool's gold. And he knew he had fooled them by the end of the month. They just decided that we'll go on with the charade. So they've gone on a charade with 10 years, and everyone in the Vatican knows Benedict was the Pope until death. They all know it. And that's why they won't address the argument. All they can do is ridicule people who speak about it. And you can't get credentials at the Vatican unless you hold the charade. And so all the big news reporters in the English-speaking world, they're all involved in the scam. And that's why you haven't heard about this.
So why would he do that? Why would he trick the cardinals into thinking that he had resigned when in reality he didn't? What was the point?
Benedict, first of all, is a man who has great confidence in the Holy Spirit and great respect for souls. He is a man that has a very strong faith that if you are in the grace of God, the Holy Spirit will give you light to see the truth. And yet, at the same time, Benedict, despite what he knew about the men around him, he didn't want to judge them. So what he did is he put them to the test. And he did something which honest men would see, recognize, and respond to. But dishonest men would pretend they didn't see it. As a matter of fact, I have 2 sources that tell me that Cardinal Burke, from the day the renunciation was made, knew that it was not an abdication, that it was only a resignation, and that a conclave should not be called. And until 2016, he told all his friends that Benedict was still the Pope. So I'm sure other cardinals knew it too, but they're in a very small minority. And they don't feel that they are not, unfortunately, they have not been the men that have the courage to come out and risk everything and say it. They figure they'll lose their privileges, or no one would believe them, or I don't know why.
So did it happen the way he intended it to happen? In other words, is this what Benedict intended, that people would think he had resigned but he hadn't? Or did he intend to resign only one part and then maybe have an extraordinary vicar?
So he intended to resign in the sense of, just go in retirement, okay? Because that way he'd still get the perks, he'd still keep the dignity, he'd still have the immunity from being prosecuted, because he had all these people in Germany harassing him, and he could live in a nice little monastery in the center of Vatican.
Right.
And if they had asked him to appoint a vicar, he would have appointed a vicar.
Okay.
Waited for that, but no, they decided to go elect another pope. In his declaratio, first of all, he calls it a declaratio. He doesn't call it a renunciatio or an abdicatio. But let us know it's an administrative act. And since it's an administrative act, it's not a juridical act. Therefore, it makes no change in power. Okay. But he declares 2 things in there, and that one, he's going to renounce the ministry on the 28th of February. And that
Yes.
that is invalid, because you can't declare that you're renouncing something in the future. It just doesn't work
Okay.
unless you're going into retirement. Okay, so he's really resigning, and that a conclave should be held for the election of his successor by those who are.
Yes.
Now, if he had abdicated, there's no reason for him to say that a conclave should be called, because if you abdicate, it's the laws of the church go into motion, and there's going to be a conclave because the see
Right.
is vacant. You would only do it if you feared that people would think that you've abdicated and then call a conclave at the wrong time. Okay.
Yes.
Benedict never let anyone onto what he was doing, although he consistently, for the next 10 years, always spoke of himself as the one true pope, as saying that explicitly he did not do that Celestine V did, the famous pope in the 13th century who abdicated, and that he did something that no pope has done in 1,000 years, comparing himself with Benedict VIII, who renounced the ministry. So if you look at everything he said in the German, in all his biographies and interviews after he renounces, he's absolutely perfectly consistent that he only resigns and he doesn't abdicate. And that's why he
Okay.
keeps wearing the white, living in the Vatican, and getting the perks. Now, those who claim that that is false are accusing the man to be a trickster that just wanted to pretend he was resigning, or crooked, because when you give up the office, you have to give up the perks. But he had perks for 10 years after. So he was, if he abdicated, he was stealing. Okay. No one in the Vatican, no one anywhere in the world has said he stole the perks for 10 years.
Right.
Well, to steal them, he's still the Pope, because you can't get perks. You can't get free Swiss Guard. Swiss Guard only protect the Pope. You can't live in a private papal residence. You can't have the head of the papal household be your secretary. Doesn't work that way.
Although he did say, I think a couple of years after his resignation, he said Pope Francis is Pope.
No. Mm-mm. There was an
No.
Italian journalist who interviewed him,
Right.
and in the interview, he said to the journalist, "There's only one Pope."
Mhm.
The journalist then wrote the article and said, "Benedict says there's only one Pope, and it is Francis." It is Francis, Benedict never said. This is Massimo Fagioli, one of the most dishonest Italian journalists, and a good friend of Bergoglio.
So, brother, tomorrow you've got an assembly of Catholics of the Roman Church to choose a new Bishop of Rome. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay.
And what is this process? What is going to happen?
Okay, so when Benedict died, that triggered the papal law Universi Dominici Gregis, which required the cardinals, according to Canon 349, to follow it strictly. And that gave him, the College of Cardinals, the duty of convening and beginning a conclave within 21 days to elect Benedict's successor, who would receive the Patrimonus and the grace of Christ and be the legitimate successor of St. Peter. Now, the cardinals have no freedom not to do that. There's no part of that law that says you can decide not to do it. No, they have to do it. And there was really no reason for them not to do it, because they could have elected Bergoglio a second time. There's nothing in church law saying you can't elect someone to the papacy a second time.
Okay.
Popes have been popes 3 or 4 times, same person. So, but they didn't do it. Now, their duty is to provide for the Church of Rome a bishop by offering that to someone. If they fail to do that, the right returns to the church, because the cardinals are only representatives of the whole church by papal law. And that's how they're actually administrative office. Christ didn't establish the cardinals. Okay, there weren't even cardinals in the early church. Some people tried to claim that St. Jerome was a cardinal, but they didn't have that term. And the Latin word cardinal just means one of the chief, important clerics of the city. And the people of Christ, his faithful, his sheep, they have right to have a bishop. We often forget that Christ died on the cross to merit for us the sacraments. He wants he wants to save our souls, and he gives us the sacraments for that. One of the sacraments he gives is the sacrament of orders. And so his sheep will have shepherds. And to leave the sheep without shepherds is one of the worst sins against the will of Jesus Christ that can be committed. It just can't be tolerated. But of all the churches in the world, only one church has the privilege of electing a bishop. And that comes from apostolic right. And this means that was established by one of the apostles themselves. In the history of the church, in diverse ages and centuries, the bishops or the popes have allowed the people or cardinals or canons or priests or certain individuals to elect the bishop. Pretty much now, the Pope names all the bishops in the Roman Rite. But for the first 1,000 years at Rome, the people would gather together and they would choose the man they wanted to be their bishop and their shepherd. And if he said yes, then if he wasn't a priest, they'd carry him on their arms on their shoulders to the nearest basilica, and they'd have him consecrated a bishop. And he was already a bishop, and he'd immediately become their bishop. And so the Catholics who understand all these truths, they have a right to the sacraments. And here at Rome, we have no clergy who have the moral integrity to say the truth about these things. The clergy are all following Bergoglio into his crazed, whacked out Pachamama religion. I have seen an image of Bergoglio with the Sacred Heart in the middle of his chest, as if Bergoglio was Jesus Christ. I had a woman tell me that in confession, the priest said, "You shouldn't criticize Pope Francis. Pope Francis is God." And this is because they understand Bergoglio is not just someone who the globalists wanted there. Bergoglio is the fruit of 3 centuries of corruption, clerical corruption, of what they want to turn the priesthood into. They're not against mass and they're not against dressing as priests, but they want to be able to do it without the religion. Okay, so just you have churches like the Anglican Church, which is like church of appearances with no reality. There's a lot of clergy who want that, especially in countries like Italy, where being a priest is more a social status thing than an act of faith. So we don't have the sacraments. If I walk into any church in Rome, they know me from my writings, I would be refused the sacrament. I knew one pastor, when he saw me handing out some stuff about Benedict still the Pope, he said, "I excommunicate you from my parish, don't even step at the door." So if Catholics who just know these things and say the truth can't get the sacraments, we're without a bishop. What are we going to do? So
Right.
Catholics have the right to have a Catholic bishop at Rome. There has been times at Rome there have been heretical bishops, and the Catholics got together and elected their own. So I'll use the example of 251 AD, Cornelius. 200 clergy came together with maybe a couple hundred other lay people, and they elected Pope Cornelius I. The Novatians followers didn't like that, and they started a schism and elected him Pope, and it was one of the first anti-popes. So if you look at it from that point of view, it doesn't really sound so unusual, because Catholics have the right to have a bishop. And in the Church of Rome, Peter gave us that right to elect our own. And for the first 1,000 years, it was the clergy, religious and laity, meeting together on some sunny day in some place or church. It was always a different place, electing their bishop, and he would say yes or no. So it's not anything really radical. It just hasn't happened in 1,000 years. And that's because this is the first time in 1,000 years that all those who have the right to elect the Pope have failed to act. Because, even Cardinal Burke, let's say Cardinal Burke wanted that there be a conclave, but Cardinal Ray, who's the dean of the College of Cardinals, decided not to call a conclave. Cardinal Burke from Wisconsin could say, "I'm calling a conclave. Any cardinals want to come, and we're going to elect a successor Benedict." He could have done it, and the person they chose would have been the Pope.
How many people are you expecting tomorrow?
So I know that the news of this event has gone out to 4 million Catholics and 7,000 priests. Everyone in the city knows it's going to take place. Maybe a lot are pretending not to. And I know that
Right.
maybe 25,000 people have logged onto the site to find where it is, when it is, and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I rented a room that can hold 3,000 and enough workers to look at everyone's credentials and make sure that they're Catholic and live in the area that you have to be.
Yes.
It's hard to say how many it's going to be, but that's one of the big unknowns. But the validity of it isn't affected by how many.
Sure. And what happens? So, once this person accepts the election, what happens then? You would recognize this man as Pope, and where would
Yes,
So we've got Pope Francis in the Vatican right now, which the majority of the Catholic world recognizes as, I mean, whether bad or good Pope, they recognize him as the Pope. So, what would happen with this man who is, tomorrow selected? Where would he go?
Okay. Well, first of all, in the Vatican, we don't have a pope. We have an anti-pope.
Right.
He calls himself Francis Jorge Mary Bergoglio. But the man who accepts the election will become the vicar of Christ on earth. And Christ's prayer for him that your faith, I've prayed for you, Peter, that your faith may not fail, will be for that man. And there are people who say, well, how could this possibly ever convince the Catholic world? How could this person ever possibly get recognized? Because, but that's a question that comes to a mind without faith. Once you realize it's the prayer of Jesus Christ that's going to be at this guy's back, then all the problems will be resolved. And because Christ has to defend him, because Christ said to Peter, whatsoever you bind on earth. And Peter gave to the Church of Rome the right to elect their own bishop. And that right is always the fail-safe switch in the church. And a lot of people say, well, no, it can't happen anymore. There's a papal law, only the cardinals can. But just imagine if the enemies of the church killed the Pope and all his cardinals. How would we elect a Pope? And the fail-safe wouldn't be the bishops or a council. It would be the faithful of the Church of Rome. And so he'll become the vicar of Christ. And I don't know what name he'll take. And I don't even know who's going to be elected. I've organized this because I see that the Catholics have this right, and the Holy Spirit's inspired people from all around the world to send me enough money to rent these things. Spent $60,000 organizing this event and advertising it. But it's for the people of the Church of Rome to decide. And in the meeting, they will nominate who they think, and they will explain why they think the person nominated. So it could be a cardinal, it could be a bishop, it could be a local priest, it could be someone from some other part of the world. I have no idea because nominations take place during the meeting.
So anybody could be nominated, as I understand. There's not a list of people who are up for nomination. No.
No. So it has to be a man, an adult, celibate, baptized, free of ecclesiastic penalties and censures. Doesn't have to be a priest, doesn't have to be a bishop, doesn't have to be a cardinal. They could even elect Jorge Mary Bergoglio a second time.
I was just about to ask you, is Francis eligible for the vote?
Well, some people don't consider him a Catholic, but according to the norm of canon law, you're Catholic until you're condemned to not be a Catholic. So yeah, if all the clergy of the Rome come out tomorrow and they vote for Bergoglio, then from that moment they vote for him. He becomes the Pope.
And is the Vatican aware of this? Have you had any communication from them?
Yeah, because 2 weeks ago, on the 11th, I issued a solemn warning to the College of Cardinals, and 3 copies to the Dean of the College, and 3 copies to De Donatis, the Cardinal Vicar of the Diocese of Rome, warning them if they didn't act, they would lose the right, and then the people would be able to elect the bishop. And therefore they need to get their act together and exercise their right. The response of the Vatican was to take the title of the document in Italian and tell Google to censor it from all search results.
And you never received an actual response from them?
No, it's not necessary that they respond to me. You can find the document on all search engines except Google. So they read it and they were terrified because they asked Google to remove from search results. So, but they didn't act on it. I guess they figured that, you know, no one has this audacity, you know. And I get a lot of criticism, like, brother, you calling a conclave, you know. I have had the audacity to help the Catholics of the Church of Rome.
Right.
Because I love the Catholic faith, I love Jesus Christ, I love the papacy, and I have pity on people who have no hope. And here at Rome, we have no hope. You know, if a priest comes to town once, thrice a year, you have the sacraments. How can you live the Christian life like that? To have a clergy that are just so, you know, they're putting statues of Pachamama up in their church.
Yes.
They're putting little cups of soil consecrated to demons on the altar. They're changing the words of the Mass. They changed the Our Father into a heretical form. It no longer says, and put us and lead us not in temptation. It says something crazy like, you know, do not let us fall or something. I don't know. They changed. I mean, Bergoglio changed the Our Father in the Italian language.
Yes.
I mean, you change the words of Jesus Christ. So it's just, and then we won't even talk about, he ordered all the churches of Christendom closed during the pandemic.
Right.
One that didn't, they just didn't happen. He ordered it to be done. The churches actually closed the doors before the government ordered it. So we're not dealing with just corruption in the church. We're not dealing with just foreign influence in the church. We're dealing with something that is apocalyptically evil.
Evil, absolutely insidious. That's exactly what it is. What do you say to Catholics who refuse to recognize what you're suggesting, who still hang on to Francis, even though they'll say he's an anti-pope, he's a bad pope, he's a heretic, but they still maintain that he is the valid pope? What do you say to people to Catholics who are holding on to that?
Not just because you're baptized doesn't mean you're living the Catholic religion as an adult.
Okay? Right.
And a lot of Catholics never are put in a situation where they have to make a decision of faith that takes them beyond the ordinary. And so most people are Catholic only because everyone around them is doing it. Mm-hmm. Friends do it, and they get social acceptance for doing it. That's why they go to the Catholic church down the street and not the synagogue. Okay. Many Catholics don't even know that ours is the true faith, the only faith. They've never read the history of the church. They've never run into some Protestant preacher and had to defend the virginity of Our Lady, why we believe in transubstantiation. So they don't know that. So to ask them to even consider that Pope Francis is not the Pope is a question that instills in them terror, because it's asking them to go intellectually into a realm they've never entered. Okay. Right. Like a little boy has never been to the town next door, and he has no way of imagining that because he doesn't have a car and his bike can't get him there. It's so far away. It's kind of imaginary that town exists. Only an adult has no fear because he's been there many times. So it's the same thing with Catholics of the faith. I can understand why they're absolutely terrified from it. Mostly because the priests are terrified. If a priest comes out and says, well, Bergoglio is not the Pope because Benedict's still the Pope, then he's immediately confronted with a problem, because at Mass he has to say, in communion with our Pope, and has to name the Pope in the canon of the Mass. Yes. Not in all the Novus Ordo versions of the canon of the Mass, but in many of them. So if he blurts out Benedict rather than Francis, people are going to say, what on earth are you doing? And the bishop's going to give him a call. You're out of there, son. Now, the bishops do anything to get rid of a priest, anything. And priests are absolutely terrorized. There's canceled priests all over the thing. And they're being canceled for apparently lesser or greater things than that. So when you start talking to a priest about this, he's like, people tell me priests run away. because if they even allow themselves to think of that, then they'll feel themselves obliged to do something that will be the end of their job.
Right.
Tomorrow, when Catholics when the Catholics offer to a man to be their bishop at Rome, it's going to be earth-shaking. It's going to cause a lot of people to open their eyes. It's going to create lots of controversy, and it's going to strike a lot of people's consciences, because you can't construct an argument against it. It's rock sound and canon law and right. If you attack it any way, you're going to have to dismantle the Catholic faith. If you say, well, Catholics can't do this, then you're denying that all the popes in the first 1,000 years were the successors of St. Peter.
Right.
And then what will the Catholic Church? If you say that they can't do this because Bergoglio is the true pope, well, you just bring it. The fact that Benedict did abdicate is already proven, because they've had 10 years to argue against it, and they won't argue against it. They won't even. This shows you how much they won't argue against it. There is a group of scholars that meets every week on the internet, and I know the leader of this group, and they talk about vaccines and the Great Reset, things like that. So they're going to have Archbishop Bugnolo, and Bugnolo had promised to take any question from the audience. So the leader of this organization, he invited me to participate. I said, if I participate, Bugnolo won't show, but I'll write you my question. And I wrote a question. As soon as Bugnolo saw my question, he canceled his appointment, because they don't even want to touch this argument. This is the elephant in the room, okay? This is because if the cardinals ever admit that they lied to the Catholic world and elected a man illegally to be the Pope, and have let this guy destroy the church for 10 years and destroy vocations and throw all the Catholics in China under the rug, that's the end of them. They will become the most hated clerics on the face of the earth. So many families destroyed by the doctrine and remorse Laetitia that you could get divorced and still receive the sacraments. I know dozens of parents who've seen their children's marriages destroyed because they believe Pope Francis is the Pope, and that doctrine comes from Christ. So they've committed such a heinous crime against the church that there's only one option left for them to pretend they did nothing. And they're drawing the whole church into doom. And that's why what we are going to do tomorrow at the Rome Park Marriott Hotel, as the noon hour strikes, is going to be something that is going to be like a huge earthquake in the church. And a lot of people speak against it, but you'll start noticing that all of the arguments are absurd.
And brother, will the faithful be able to watch this? Will it be televised, or can we stream it?
It's not being televised.
Okay.
Because we don't want foreign influence. We don't want people outside telling people what to do.
Right.
And we don't want governments harassing the people who have been there, maintain their privacy. So in Italian law, you can't film anyone without their permission.
Right.
And so no one in the room should be filming anything. Though we will probably allow photographs of the final ballot tallies for documentation. So.
And where will we hear of the results? Will there be journalists who will publish it, or will you publish it on your website? Where will we hear of what's happened?
We have journalists will be present in the hotel to publish it as soon as. Since I'm the chief organizer of the event, it might have some difficulty publishing on my website. You'll probably hear about it on websites first. It will probably most likely be published first by someone who doesn't believe it's true and will be making fun of it. But any news source who wants the official news about it should only speak with me. Okay, I'm the only one who's going to tell you exactly what happened and didn't happen, because I organized the event. But there'll be journalists there interviewing people who are attending and voting, and so people will get confirmations of it. So, however, unless the person elected is present and accepts, any person who's elected who's not present, they have to be formally asked and there's 8 days in which they have to agree. So we'll have to send a delegation to that part of the world or that part of Italy and ask them if they want to accept their election. Once the person elected accepts, then he becomes the vicar of Jesus Christ on earth. If he's already a bishop, then he also becomes immediately the Roman pontiff, the Pope. If he's not a bishop, then he becomes the Pope elect and the Roman pontiff elect. But he becomes, in any case, whether he's Pope or not, even if he's layman, he becomes the successor of St. Peter from the moment he's elected. You will see a great number of Catholics around the world who recognize the validity of it. And then all the devotion that they have for the Pope will be shown to him. And so he's going to get a lot of bishops and cardinals and laity and religious to support him, maybe not immediately, but eventually, until there's some kind of resolution. I personally think that it's going to be very healthy for the church, because Bergoglio is not going to live forever. And once he dies, the College of Cardinals has to elect someone. So if the people of Rome have already come out and said, we want this man as to be our bishop, that's going to be a very powerful argument for the whole college. Let's end this division and elect this guy in our conclave, and that way the whole church will agree that he's the Pope. And then and we'll have unity in the church, but it will be someone who the people want, not which power brokers decided. Some people know nothing about their faith. Okay,
Right.
Some people know nothing about papal elections. But when the people of Rome, when the faithful of Rome come together to elect their bishop, that's a bit different than a small group in any part of the world coming together and claiming.
Yes.
Because you can't elect the Pope if you're not in the Diocese of Rome. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Second of all, when the faithful of Rome elect their bishop, the whole church has always recognized that man as to be the Pope.
Yes.
So if you want to mock that or make fun of that, then you're just an ignorant. You're just totally ignorant, and you're a fool. And as we get back to what I was saying earlier before off camera about the social media phenomenon,
Yes.
there's a lot of people on social media who give you information every day, give you commentary every day. But you have to understand that what attracts people on social media are motivations that lead them to misrepresent the truth, because they want you to keep listening to them. So they're going to naturally incline to start arrogating to themselves the authority over things they know nothing about, and insisting that what they say is right and that you should listen to them rather than else. It's like a little envy club or something. So what I tell people is, don't listen to anyone's opinion on this unless they first know Latin, and second, have read canon law, and third, have opened a book and read it cover to cover on the history of the election of Roman pontiffs. And none of these people have. All the people criticizing what we're doing tomorrow are these kind of social media types.
Mhm.
Some of them claim Benedict's the Pope, and they've been doing it for years. When it comes to the election, they don't want an election, because if we get a Pope and the problems in the church are solved, you can't go out to YouTube anymore and panhandle.
Brother, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us. If people want to reach you, brother, they can go to fromrome.info. Is that correct?
Yes.
They can get any news coming from the assembly on that website.
Pretty much so. Maybe it might be a day or two, but I will try to update it.